guys, Sandra here from createinspain, and today I wanted to give you a really handy tip if you're using concepts on your iPad to make SVG files, or you want to make SVG files for your cutting machine. Now I've got a piece of paper here and I have set my zoom to 100%, so this is actually the size that I would be cutting. Now when you are actually doing cut files for a cutting machine, quite often you want to have a print and cut outline or a cut outline around your object, and this is where saving as an SVG can be a real bonus, or it can be a pain in the neck depending on how you do it. So for example, I'm going to do a little doodle here, and I've got my line setting to 1.01 millimeters, and so if I do this shape here, I might think, if I was doing this in a finer line, I might think I've actually got these points joined up when I haven't, and that can be a real pain in the neck when it comes to cutting machines. You all know, if you use a cutting machine, you're doing an outside line, you want that line to be complete, because otherwise you have to do a trace on it. And if you have to do a trace on it, you sometimes have to do an offset on it, because if you've got incomplete lines, it's just going to mess things up. You just know it does. Okay. So if I go to the precision mode, which is on the left hand side, and if I haven't got it open, it looks like this. If I tap on it, it opens up. And one of the tools it has under there is a snap option. So tap on snap and then go on the options. And what you want to do is switch on the key points, keep the grid off, I've not got a grid on there anyway, autocomplete and my active layer. So now if I draw a circle, oh, it's completed itself, or it's given me a point to tap on. Actually, you've got to do it relatively quickly, but it will give me a place to tap on to complete it if it's not close enough. So that is what those functions will do. They will join to certain parts. Now if I, for example, decide to put a line going out from here, it's joined it to there. Even though I'm not actually touching that black line, it joined it up. That's too far away. But if I go reasonably close, it says, okay, I think you meant to join it onto there. And that makes your drawing very, very much easier. Now bear in mind, when you're using concepts and SVGs, it doesn't actually cut around your black lines in this case. It cuts a single line through, or it puts a single line through the middle of it. So if I select all this lot, and I tap on my line width and I take it right down to the minimum, that's what the cut would look like. A bit more difficult for you to see, which is why I didn't draw it like that in the first place, but that is what the cut would look like. It's gone through the middle of all those black lines. So the easiest way of actually drawing in concepts with SVG format in mind for cutting machines is to take the line width right down to the minimum that you can see in the first place, because it shows you more clearly the exact result you're going to get. If I want to actually use a pen in my holder and draw this, this will draw out perfectly. It won't have double lines on it, I won't have to trace it, I'm done, I'm dusted. And at the same time, if I want to cut out an actual outline around my design, the SVG will do that. So if I make this bigger, if I pull this out and make this bigger, there we go. If you keep an eye on here, let me shrink it back down again. Okay. If I shrink it down, the line width gets less, and if I make it bigger, it gets thicker. Okay, so if you alter the size of your design, you want to select it and then make sure your line width is set down to the minimum that it can be. Now the other advantage of doing this is if you actually want to do something like stamp making and you want to do a design and you want to make sure that all your lines are exactly the same width, you can do that because you can tap on here and you can do that. So whatever you've got selected, you can control the width of it as much as you actually like. And if you export that as a PNG, you will then get those double lines and not the single one. But if you import the single line into your cutter software as an SVG, you can then apply an offset to it and make the lines as thick or as thin as you want for cutting. So it gives you so many options, but the fact that you can actually close your lines without being really precious about it is very, very handy. The other thing I wanted to show you for SVG, and it used to be a problem, but it isn't any longer because there is a tool that goes with it. Okay, in concepts, if you use the eraser, I could rub this out. I'll make my eraser a bit bigger, otherwise it'll take me all day. Okay, I could rub this out, and you might think, oh yeah, that's exactly what I want. But if you export that as an SVG, what you're going to get are the eraser lines showing up in your design. Not good, not clever, pain in the neck. You really don't want to do that. So instead, use this tool here, which is the slice tool. Now I'm just going to go back and back again. So I've got my yucky lines in there. And I've got my slice tool. And my slice tool will do the same thing that my eraser did, but it doesn't have those lines coming up when you transfer the SVG to your cutter software. They're gone, deleted, vamoosed. Brilliant. Another tool that's really handy for the kind of artwork that I want to do is the nudge tool. And let me just demonstrate that for you. If I draw a line here, and it's got no anchor points, this is a line, it's floating free and clear. And I then use the nudge tool, and it's this funny sort of bump looking thing. You can alter the nudge like any other tool to whatever size that you want. But it nudges. Now if I just pick it up and nudge this, there we go. Changes the shape. If I nudge it from the end of a line, it will shorten the line. It'll curve it and do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So it makes your line act like a piece of string, basically, and you can play around with it and do exactly what you need. It's very handy if you've drawn a line and it's just slightly out of place because you can move it around a bit. It's very handy if you've drawn a shape which has got a straight line as part of it where you actually want a slight curve on it, say a flower pot base or something like that. If you've drawn a U shape with a straight line on the base instead of the curve, you can just nudge that curve into it afterwards. It's really handy. Good fun for playing with, actually. It's just quite mesmerising to do this with multicolour strings. If you're a bit of a dork like me. But there we go. There's a few hints and tips of how to use concepts for SVGs and use them on your cutting machine. Now that I've shown you how I use concepts in different ways with the SVG, I wanted to show you the practicalities. Now, up here I have just a straightforward cutout of the design that I did after I finished filming my video. I decided, for some strange reason, and don't ask me why, to do a hippo doctor. I have no idea why. I don't know why. Yeah, I just have a strange imagination. just leave it at that. I have a very strange imagination. So I decided I wanted to make a stamp, but at the same time I wanted to share the file, and I realised that most people are not going to make their own stamps, but they might use a digital stamp or indeed use their machines, as I do, to draw images and cut them out. And this is the sort of result that you can get. Now this was an SVG that I just imported into my cutter software. Just got a little tab there. And I kept the lines very, very thin. And so when I put my pen in the holder, it could go off and whiz, 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 and it was done. So with the single line, you can do the drawing and you can add an offset to it if you want to, or you can just do a shadow layer if you like, and you can have your cutout, and the offset is easy to do because the lines are all joined up. Hence why I wanted to show you the importance of having that function switched on when you're drawing, or at least when you're drawing outside lines. Now, here is the stamp that I've made, and this is the print. It's on normal paper, this one, it's not the transparency that I made. This is the print that makes the stamp. And I exported that particular image. I altered the line thickness in Concepts. I then exported that image as a PNG because I didn't need to put any cut lines around it or anything like that. I needed it as an image. So I'm going to start to colour in my hippo. Now with very small images you may not want to do more than one colour per area. It depends on the type of image that you're colouring in and obviously your skills with a brush and whether you actually need to do more than one colour. So this is the Chromatek Watercolour brush set that I'm using. You put a line around the outside and then you go in with the brush, which has water in it, and you literally dissolve the line. And you don't have to dissolve absolutely all of it, you want to dissolve the inner part of the line. And if you want to, you can even make little streaks like that to indicate shadows, or you can blend it all. It's up to you. They blend really nicely, and I don't want a heck of a lot of colour on this hippo's face. Just going to pull some more shadow out of that edge there, and I'm quite happy. Now the only thing I would say is that this is quite a large brush tip. If you're doing very small items like this, you might find it a bit too big. You can of course buy water brushes which have got smaller tips. This one for example has a smaller tip. This one however is without water at the moment, quite deliberately, because I've taken the filters out of here. They got bunged up eventually because I used and abused them. So I've taken the water out of this and I'm just using it as a straightforward brush by dipping it in water when I'm using it at the moment. So I could, if I wanted to, change over to that one. So I want to do all the grey areas. There is a slightly darker area underneath the chin, and I want to put a little bit on there, a little bit on there. That won't bother to be watered. And I want to do the part of her body, which is underneath the dress, like so. And this is going to be mostly coloured in because it would be relatively dark, and so I'll add a little water on there just to get it moving a bit. I'm being careful not to add too much water because I do want the depth of colour underneath. Slightly more colour is needed just in this bit. There we go. And I want to put some colour on her feet. So I'm just going to do it from the top where the ankle joint will be. And just allow that to flood into the foot area. Now the important thing, if you're not used to watercolour, the important thing to realise is that any wet area will join with another wet area which is adjacent to it. So for example, I will leave this to dry for a few minutes before I do any of her coat and any of the other coloured areas that are next to the skin, because if I don't, it'll just end up making a complete and utter mess. Now this is one I've done where I've deliberately not let it dry in between, and you can see the results. Where you have the areas which have been dried properly, they're fine. Where it's not been allowed to dry and I've gone in with a different colour, you can see where it bleeds and it just makes it look awful. Okay, so that's why you always let your areas dry before going to the area adjacent to it. If you don't, you'll get a lot of bleeding. And although in some instances you might like bleeding, if it's a flower or something, that might be okay, on an item like this, you don't want it. Here are two of my hippos. I think they've come out quite nicely. With the one on the right hand side, I used a Sakura glaze pen to do the rubber cord, as it were, for the stethoscope. And on this one I just did it in the grey ink and put a black ink over part of it, so there's a little shadow there. Both of the stethoscopes have got a little bit of silver metallic ink on there, and what I did was I used the silver metallic pen from the Sakura range, put the ink on and then blotted it with a tissue so that there wasn't too much ink on it. I find that's better for something which is a little more delicate like this. So I hope you like these two ladies, and as I said, I have no idea why I decided to do hippos, but there we go, hippos are what we've got. I will link the file below. Now, if you do not have a cutting machine, don't despair. You can print out the images and you can colour them in by hand and fussy cut them if you want. It really doesn't make too much difference if you're prepared to put in the work. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.